Doctor Who Season 2, or Series 15, or Season 41. Whatever you want to call it, it happened, and wow. Full disclosure right off the bat, I really enjoyed this series, mostly. It felt like a proper return to form for the show, the most I've enjoyed Doctor Who since Series 10. And I say this as someone who enjoyed Season 1, the difference in quality here is night and day. I'm pretty sure these two series were written and filmed back to back, so I am very confused how one can be leagues better than the other, but hey, I'm glad this era found its footing in the end. Ncuti Gatwa enters his second and surprisingly final series as the 15th Doctor. Joined by companion Belinda Chandra, played by Varada Setu, the Doctor tries to get her home on May the 24th, stopping along the way to fight evil barbers, Weird Al, and perhaps most terrifying of all, Doctor Who fans. This series continues a lot of the main themes of Season 1, the pantheon of gods, glup shitto after glup shitto, space babies, sure, but does this series hit the mark? Does it continue this era's goal of being a jumping on point for new viewers? Does it So turn on your story engine and don't make Mr. Ring-a-Ding laugh as we go through Doctor Who Season 2. And if you're just here to leave a comment about how woke bad and you somehow haven't clicked off yet, I have a special message just for you. I hope that makes things clear. Now on with the video. Season 2 begins with the robot revolution, which I can only describe as your typical RTD series opener. Nothing groundbreaking, but a fun little adventure to start things off. We're introduced to Belinda, the second companion of RTD's tenure, a woman who works in a hospital. Hey, wait a minute.
It's Belinda!
It's Linda, with a G.
The Doctor is looking for Belinda, and accidentally shuts off all the power in the hospital. I'm surprised he's so calm about this. This probably got someone killed, but sure. And Belinda gets kidnapped by space robots. To be honest, at first, I was thinking this was pretty similar to a Sarah Jane Adventures episode, but things end up going in a different direction. Space Babies, the previous series opener, contained a lot of the superficial elements of an RTD series opener, such as Ruby ringing her mum, but the problem there was that these moments didn't feel particularly natural. It just felt like the episode needed to cross these things off so that there's some semblance of character depth and emotional value. And to be honest, it surprised me that RTD, whose original run was defined by its grounded, emotional storytelling, seemed to now just see this stuff as an unimportant distraction that you need to just get out of the way to make room for space babies. Things feel different this time around though, as Belinda's initial characterization is much stronger. One of the main problems with the Doctor and Ruby's relationship was that they got on too well. Literally never fighting or disagreeing on anything, aside from one brief moment in Boom. The 10th Doctor and Rose had a similar thing in Series 2, and I'm just not a fan of this dynamic. So it felt really refreshing and promising when Belinda didn't just magically trust and worship the Doctor. I mean, she sticks with him, but she's not happy about it. There's even a bit at the end where the Doctor tries to get Belinda to travel with him, and she pretends to go along with it, before suddenly slapping him in the face with the reality of how insensitive and selfish his attitude is. It sets up a really interesting relationship between them, Belinda being more of a reluctant companion than anything, and the Doctor learning to ground himself after his happy-go-lucky attitude with Ruby and arguably a lot of the 13th Doctor era. I mean, this whole episode happened because Belinda refused some guy's offer to give her the stars, so yeah, really nice thematic connection there. Like, yes, Queen, you tell him, don't let him control you. Queen, what are you doing? Queen, stop. Stop it, Queen. Stop it! The whole thing with the robots not hearing every ninth word was clever, especially when we find out Alan is also hiding a secret message in his words. It really encourages you to pay attention to the dialogue. So this episode contains commentary on AI and incels. I say commentary very loosely here. The big bad of this episode is the AI generator. So at first, I'm thinking, okay, commentary on AI, while Blue Yonder did it pretty well, so I'm curious what this episode has to say. Only for it to just be wordplay, something Russell seems to really enjoy at the minute. It feels strange to use the term AI generator as nothing more than a buzzword. Because, like, yeah, AI as it currently is a bad thing that is having negative effects on our society. So a whole episode where AI is the bad guy would make sense. But that just doesn't happen. The episode doesn't go further into the topic of AI, just once again uses it as a buzzword. I can definitely see the incel thing, though. Alan is someone who holds very outdated and misogynistic views towards women, and blames the world for his own unremarkableness. But then he's taken to a world where he makes the rules, where he can force Belinda to be the way he wants her to be, after turning a peaceful planet into a war-torn hell of slavery. But the thing is, this dark path Alan goes down can largely be attributed to the robots, or to put it more vaguely, the technology around him, radicalizing him, making him believe he can have everything he wants, forcing him deeper into an echo chamber that causes nothing but harm for himself and those around him. This is genuinely a great analogy for the effect social media can have on people who might be insecure or uneducated on certain topics. The very fact that Andrew Tate has a platform proves that this is a genuine problem in the real world. And this stuff is hurting Alan. He started this war, corrupting the planet with his toxicity, but now that corrupted technology is harming him as he's lost in an echo chamber he can't break out of. But pay attention to Alan's dialogue after the Doctor reveals he's hiding a message in every ninth word.
Belinda, mine forever.
The episode doesn't bring attention to this message specifically, but it shows that he's still a bad guy with bad intentions, so it is satisfying when he stopped. And man, that ending shot is so good. So yeah, The Robot Revolution is a pretty good series opener. The only thing I don't really get is the whole AI generator thing that goes nowhere, but the episode still contains some good social commentary with more to it than you might initially think. The Doctor and Belinda's chemistry is off to a great start, their dynamic is unique, and the Doctor's god complex that's been brewing since Series 11 finally gets called out, and oh my god. Also, we stand Polish. The best creation of the entire show. Please give me more Polish, thank you. As far as the supernatural themes of this era go, this episode is the golden standard, taking experimental concepts and creating something truly unique and era-defining. So, first of all, Mr. Ring-a-Ding takes up an unhealthy amount of space in my brain. I love this character so much, genuinely one of my favourite villains of the entire show. The animation is so vibrant and expressive, Alan Cumming gives the perfect voice for the character, the song is catchy as fuck, let's be honest, and he's just the right level of camp where you can enjoy the silly stuff while still taking the character seriously to a degree. He only has 5 minutes of screen time, but he's clearly made a lasting impression, and I think there's potential to use this virality to bring him back in the future. You know, have an episode where someone finds the original film and it goes viral online, allowing him to come back. There's an idea somewhere there. I just really want more Mr. Ring-a-Ding, is that too much to ask? There's a lot going on in this episode, but it still manages to fit in the character side of things, developing the character of Belinda and her relationship with the Doctor as she talks about her parents. There are also references to her job as a nurse, and it's nice to just have these reminders that Belinda still has a life outside of the TARDIS. It's something that I think was quite lacking with Ruby. Like, she cared about her family, and she still knew how to play the piano, and that's about it. This episode is set in the 50s, so naturally the topic of racism is brought up. First with the segregation in the diner, but Lux also takes advantage of the attitudes of the time with the policeman and the woman, just to mess with the Doctor and Belinda's heads. I think the racism and references to segregation in this episode are natural and believable, and the Doctor has a fantastic line in response to these attitudes.
I have toppled worlds. Sometimes I wait for people to topple the world. Until then, I live in it and I shine.
You know, the simple fact is, the Doctor is black now, and I'm glad that that fact doesn't get ignored by the show, either in a negative context or a positive one, as we see later in the series. Also, I think someone owes Martha Jones an apology. The scene where the Doctor and Belinda meet Mr. Ring-a-Ding is so good. There are a lot of subtleties in Ncuti's performance here that just perfectly encapsulate how the Doctor would react in a situation like this. At first, he's amazed, wanting to study and find out everything he can about Mr. Ring-a-Ding. Then he questions him on the missing people, wary of the cartoon's true nature but still keeping an open mind in case he's not to blame. But once it becomes clear Mr. Ring-a-Ding is behind the missing people, the Doctor's curiosity and optimism immediately turns to caution and fear, all building up to the giggle, as he's revealed to be part of the Pantheon. All this build-up leads to the Doctor and Belinda running away, as Mr. Ring-a-Ding is forced to dance to his own cartoon. It's a funny moment, but also ties in with what we know about the gods, how they're bound by the rules of their existence. And in Lux's case, he's bound to the rules of a cartoon.
I'll getcha! I'm Mr. Ring.
Lux also does the fourth wall breaks that the other gods have done, but it's more than just, OMG, he acknowledged us. He just makes self-aware comments about being a cartoon, and it's fresh and funny.
I'm a two-dimensional character. You can't expect backstory.
The episode gets really crazy halfway through, as the Doctor and Belinda are trapped in a film, looking and talking like they're in Scooby-Doo, until they break out by acquiring character depth. It's a great self-aware way of developing them as characters that doesn't feel cheap or forced because it's part of this fourth wall breaking plot. And on that note, the Doctor and Belinda end up breaking out of a TV. Yeah, this is a cool episode. With all the fourth wall breaks, the logical next step was for the Doctor to realise he's in a TV show, as he meets Doctor Who fans. It's a pretty accurate portrayal of Doctor Who fans. Yes, we are annoying. But the one mistake I cannot forgive is this bit.
What's your favourite adventure?
Blink.
Definitely Blink.
Blink. Every time.
Come on, no 3 Doctor Who fans could possibly agree on a favourite episode. Be realistic. Although I can imagine every actor to have played the Doctor has had conversations exactly like this at conventions. The episode pokes fun at its audience in a light-hearted way, but also reminds us of the impact Doctor Who really has. The show has brought people together, given them something to enjoy and complain and argue about, and it really has defined people's lives, like we see here. And it's a reminder of the impact the Doctor has, injecting a magic into the world that's allowed him to go on for over 60 years. Like the Doctor said, he lives in the world, and he shines. But once the Doctor leaves this world, the fans will cease to exist. It's a weird subversion of the idea that TV characters just cease when we're not watching them, something Doctor Who has done meta-commentary on before with Forest of the Dead. Here, though, it's the viewers that disappear. But there is an element of truth to this idea too. Like I said, so many people have had their lives defined by this show, devoting so much of their time and energy into either loving or hating it. But if the show comes to an end, so do those feelings and passion. And this is a bold and relevant analogy to make here, since the show's future is currently hanging in the balance. And so, the Doctor and Belinda break out of the film, and Mr. Ringading uses the light of the Doctor's regeneration energy to feed off. At first, the transformation is going pretty well, until he becomes a CGI monster. You could see this as an analogy for the live-action Disney remakes of recent years, or the cartoonish joy sucked out of those stories as they become soulless CGI cash grabs. Definitely a bold move from Russell, given the Disney partnership, but I'm here for it. Mr. Ringading does his best Balls Trek impression.
Because that's what I never do, my lovely friends. I never go outside.
And the episode ends with the bad guy winning. Mr. Ringading is exposed to all the light in the universe, and he becomes pure light. He gets what he wants, and it's an oddly satisfying ending to the episode. He sees everything, all the stars, galaxies, all the joy and wonder of the universe, and it's beautiful. It's a surprisingly emotional and sweet end for the character. He finally found his worth, and I find myself rooting for the bad guy in a way that doesn't feel weird or wrong. I'm fully aware that Russell T Davies has said and done some questionable things during his current run as Doctor Who showrunner, but I think Lux is proof that he has absolutely still got it. He is on top form for this whole episode, giving a well-paced, unique and engaging story, with one of the best villains of the entire show and accurate social and meta commentary. Lux is a perfect example of the 15th Doctor era taking its experimental concepts and running with them. This is easily my favourite 15th Doctor episode, and a prime example of the show putting itself out there, going into fresh and experimental territory, and it paying off masterfully, resulting in one of my favourite episodes of the entire show. Oh man, the well.
Well.
Honestly, it feels like this episode shouldn't work. If you told me before the episode aired that it was going to be a sequel to Midnight, I would have fully expected 45 minutes of self-indulgence that collapses under its own weight. But man, what an episode. Yeah, this episode is a spiritual successor to the Series 4 episode Midnight, where the Doctor is trapped in an enclosed space with a group of frightened people and an impossible entity that repeats everything they say. It's a fantastic, terrifying episode that explores the effects of mob mentality and how people will revert to their most primal instincts when thrown into a situation they don't understand. It also challenges the Doctor in a way the show has never really done before, the 10th Doctor's vain and arrogant nature being used against him, resulting in him being helpless and seconds from death. It's a universally beloved episode, ranking in many people's top 10 Doctor Who episodes of all time, myself included. so you can see why making a sequel 17 years later is a massive risk. But I think The Well does a brilliant job of keeping a lot of the themes of Midnight while expanding on them and putting a more modern and topical spin on them. So, this episode takes place on the planet Midnight, 400,000 years after we were last there. In that time, the planet was ravaged by war, the diamond surface stripped bare, and now this crew is investigating a mining colony that suddenly went silent 2 weeks ago. The robot revolution had quite a classic camp sci-fi approach, akin to stuff like Star Trek or even 60s Doctor Who. The Well is more like the edgier sci-fi stories of the late 20th century, like the movie Aliens. The Well is more in line with the old Doctor Who, similar to Boom. While Lux simply could not have happened on a pre-Disney budget, The Well feels like more of a bottle episode that could have basically been the same on a BBC budget. But the fancy spacesuits and set design add a lot to the episode without it feeling like the show is going for style over substance. One of the biggest parts of Midnight, and a huge reason why the episode is so memorable, is the supporting cast. They're all ordinary, and that's exactly why it works so well. We spend the first half of the episode getting to know and like them, only for the rest of the episode to show their venal, cowardly side that accompanies their pure primal fear. It's one of the bleakest episodes of the entire show. There's no triumphant ending, there's no positive message at the end, just a showcase of the worst of humanity. It's uncomfortable because it holds a mirror up to us, how we throw others under the bus when faced with uncertainty. The Well takes a similar general approach to its story, but with a slightly more optimistic tone, the Doctor being able to take charge this time around. The side characters here definitely aren't as defined or memorable as the ones in Midnight, but when they shine, oh man, they shine. Cassio is the contentious one who just wants to take charge and nuke the whole site. Shire is the strong leader who has a surprisingly emotional death, and Alice is the absolute highlight here. Rose Ayling Ellis does such a great job with this character. She gets a perfect balance of nuance and uncertainty. Like, there's so much going on in these facial expressions, and I don't know what to make of it. Is she feeling guilty? Is she possessed by the entity? I'm left confused and unsure, and I love that. Alice is haunted by the entity, and anyone who goes behind her dies. The easiest logical solution is for them to turn their back on her and leave. And this is where that topical spin on the message of Midnight comes in. That episode showed how people look for someone to blame when things go wrong, and The Well discusses the fact that society will often turn its back on its most vulnerable people in times of uncertainty. Alice is deaf, ergo disabled, and this episode aired only a month after the UK government's vilification of disabled people began, so this commentary is very well timed. But in an optimistic spin on things, the Doctor saves her with compassion. It's a sign of how the Doctor has changed since the events of Midnight, concluding his arc of overcoming the guilt of the Time War and realizing he always finds a better way. But it also shows the importance of not losing your humanity in stressful situations. It's still not a happy ending by any means, people still died and the episode still ends on an unresolved note, but there's still the overall message of the value of life and not turning your back on the people who need the most support. I've somehow come this far without talking about the return of the Midnight entity, so let's talk about that. Its behaviour is different here, but to be fair, it's been 400,000 years. It was already shown to be quick at adapting and evolving, and who knows what it got up to in that time. And let's be honest, if it did behave the exact same way it did in Midnight, it'd be pretty unremarkable. Like that's the kind of episode you can only really do once. The entity is different here, and it's still not entirely clear how it operates, but there does seem to be more of an overtly evil motivation to it this time. We were never really sure what it wanted to do the first time around, but there was clearly a level of malice and desperation in its behaviour, mimicking the mob mentality of the group and taking advantage of it. Like I said, The Well goes for an edgy, hard sci-fi approach, yet the entity has more of a superstitious role, behaving similar to the woman in 73 Yards, with things like it breaking all the mirrors, which are commonly associated with superstition. This creates a good blend of sci-fi and mythology similar to Wild Blue Yonder. The Doctor's interaction with the entity is a really impactful moment too. A common criticism of the 15th Doctor is that he cries too much. Personally, I'm not that bothered by it, and I do think there are plenty of moments where it feels earned and adds a lot to Ncuti's performance, and this is definitely one of those times. It's such a haunting and unsettling moment, and then Ncuti tops it off by saying, "Oh yes," exactly like David Tennant, and I am so here for it. The thing is, if you got rid of the references to Midnight, The episode as a whole wouldn't change much at all. You could see that as cheap or nostalgia baiting, but if anything, I like that the references to Midnight don't have a huge impact on the plot as a whole. It allows the episode to shine on its own merits, and proves that this era can do new and creative things with old concepts, rather than just going, hey, remember this? This was in the show before. And I realize the fact I've repeatedly been comparing this episode to Midnight doesn't really support my case, but still. But man, the build up to the reveal is so good. All I needed was the word diamonds, and I just sat there anticipating the name drop. It was so good. There are also references to the Earth being destroyed, which are done in such a natural yet ominous way. We know the world is going to end eventually, but no matter what, humans live on. They spread out across the universe, constantly changing and surviving. Not here, though. The Earth and the human race are forgotten about, and it's such a foreboding moment of existential dread. And the episode ends with another unclear moment, as it seems like the entity is still there. But when Alice and a couple of others escaped, there were one too many life signs in the escape pod. Did the Doctor's Mercury trick duplicate the entity? Were they being paranoid about nothing and the entity never left Alice? Did Belinda almost die for nothing? It's a brilliantly uncertain end to the episode, and I'm sure Big Finish will have a field day with that uncertainty. Oh yeah, Mrs. Flood shows up at the end as well, and I just don't really care for this mystery, I can't lie. This is more of a critique with this season as a whole, rather than The Well specifically, but we already had Old Woman following the Doctor everywhere last season. That, and there just aren't any proper clues as to who she really is, so it just really feels like such a nothing mystery. Being a sequel to Midnight, The Well had a lot to live up to. Midnight is easily in my top 5 episodes of all time, and while I wouldn't rank The Well quite as high as that, it's still another fantastic episode. It expands on the lore of Midnight, taking its message and putting a modern spin on it. It creates another tense atmosphere, and it doesn't rely on its spiritual predecessor to stand on its own. Another absolute banger from Season 2. Mainly because it was written by the same guy who wrote Kablam and Praxeus, neither of which I'm a big fan of. But man, Pete McTighe, I sincerely apologise, I was not familiar with your game. This episode sent me through all kinds of emotions, and I think it's yet another great episode from Season 2. This episode tries to do something I think has been sorely lacking from this era of the show. It takes a step back and focuses on how the alien invasions affect this ordinary world and the companion, which I think is great. The episode focuses on Ruby and how she's coping with life after the Doctor. Those adventures were clearly fun for her, but they were a lot to go through, and this episode explores the effect that that's had on her mental health. We have seen how life after the Doctor affects previous companions, but I don't think the show has ever really tackled the short-term effects like this, and it's a really nice touch, giving a new layer of depth to Ruby's character. So when this episode started, I was thinking, okay, Love and Monsters 2. And I unironically love that episode, so, fine by me. Then I'm thinking, this Conrad guy seems pretty cool. Then the second half of the episode happens, and I'm like, oh, I want to strangle you. Conrad is one of the most effective Doctor Who villains in recent memory, and I think part of what makes him work so well is he's just so realistic. He's a conservative, reactionary grifter whose only motivation is attention and profit. He doesn't even believe in the lies and fear-mongering he spreads, and I think that makes him even more effective than if he was genuinely this delusional conspiracy theorist. He thrives on chaos, actively weaponizes his platform, and creates an echo chamber for something he himself doesn't believe in, just for his own personal gain. You see this kind of thing all the time, people creating an echo chamber and radicalizing impressionable or uninformed people, because it keeps them relevant. Like I said earlier, Andrew Tate is a prime example of this, brainwashing young men into harbouring incredibly misogynistic and downright vile attitudes. Or with Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, promising change and claiming to speak for the ordinary person, while being the ones most intent on upholding and exacerbating the inequality in the world. Or hell, look at all the anti-woke YouTubers out there, who since 2018 or even earlier have been on a constant rant. Their arguments being nothing but vague, meaningless buzzwords, insisting that every new thing is worse than the last. That's what Conrad represents. You can have all these futuristic sci-fi analogies and commentaries, but as Black Mirror proved with the episode Shut Up and Dance, sometimes the most terrifying thing is the most realistic. The opening scene showing his relationship with his mum and the abuse he received as a child helps you understand why he has ended up this way, without detracting from how irredeemably evil he is, with him constantly doubling down on the lies he spreads. And yes, when you actually do think logically about Conrad's plan, it's stupid and contrived, but that's the point. He's cultivated and radicalized an audience who follow him without question, and will keep going to more and more extremes just to keep pushing the narratives he wants to push. Conrad's sudden switch-up does come as a surprise, but there were subtle hints to his true nature earlier in the episode. When he and Ruby are having dinner together, she insinuates that the Doctor is a bit fruity, a member of the Skittle Squad, an occasional boy kisser. And there's a brief look he gives, as if there are certain thoughts in his mind, before he brushes it off with a vague, non-committal response. Which, once again, is a realistic portrayal. A lot of conservative men, when getting to know more liberal women, will often hide their political views, because they know their attitudes would be considered contentious and backwards. Probably because they are, hence why they know not to express them publicly. And we do end up getting confirmation later on that Conrad is a homophobe, as even allusions to homosexuality are considered wrong and unnatural in his wish world. Conrad's stunt gets the attention of national news, and the way they portray the situation is frustrating, but once again, not inaccurate to the real world. There are plenty of times where the media, under the guise of impartiality, will fail to properly report on right-wing stunts and actions, often making intentionally vague or misleading titles to deliberately confuse people, or just completely misrepresenting and lying about things. Conrad is doing all this stuff to try and bring down UNIT. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it's unclear what the show wants to do with UNIT as an organisation. But if you're judging this episode on its own merits, I think UNIT is handled well here. I know some people have said this episode sends a message of never doubting where your tax money goes and to never question authority, and I get why people may be apprehensive given Kablam's very questionable morals, but I don't think that's the message the episode is trying to push. The episode doesn't say you should never ask questions about how things are being run, because that's not what Conrad is doing. He isn't just asking questions, he's actively spreading harmful misinformation and jeopardizing the safety of the world for clout. And UNIT isn't portrayed as this flawless organization that can do no wrong. Kate's actions at the end are clearly quite extreme and concerning, and the episode treats them as such, while still allowing us to relish in Conrad's comeuppance, and giving Ruby a chance to show her compassion while still not magically forgiving Conrad, as he doesn't deserve that at all. Nothing bad actually happens to him until he proves he still won't stop doubling down on his lies. In all honesty though, I do find the resolution a bit unrealistic. I don't think everyone would magically side with UNIT again after all the misinformation and fear-mongering. But oh man, the Doctor's speech to Conrad. Ncuti definitely plays more of a fun, casual Doctor a lot of the time, but when his serious side shows, oh, it's good. You can tell he was hoping to intimidate Conrad here, and when it doesn't work, he tells him how he's gonna die. Conrad was desperate to make an impact, to feel like his life was worth something. And the Doctor going after one of his biggest insecurities and telling him he amounts to nothing is so visceral. But when you think about it, this is nothing compared to what previous Doctors would have done. Like, let's be honest, 12 would have absolutely decked Conrad in the face, and 9 and 10 would have consigned him down a black hole forever. The Doctor has clearly mellowed over time, but that darkness is still there, and it makes for a very satisfying moment. So yeah, the moral here is that all podcasters are evil. Finally, some accurate social commentary. No, but seriously, I really like Lucky Day. I think it gives some much needed character depth to Ruby. Better late than never, I guess. I also liked the episode's politics more than I expected, and it resulted in this segment turning into way more of a political rant than I thought it was going to be, but oh well. Conrad is a very good villain in my opinion, and once again, I like the focus on ordinary modern day Earth stuff. It's something I wish we got more of. Similar to Lux, the story in the engine is another fantastic episode that once again proves the show can absolutely go in fresh, creative directions when it wants to. This episode really pushes the show out of its comfort zone, and we end up getting something truly unique, resulting in yet another highlight of the 15th Doctor era. This episode was written by Doctor Who newcomer Inua Ellams, who mainly works in theatre, and I think it shows. I spent a lot of this episode feeling like I was watching a stage play, and I mean that in a good way. Boom had a similar stage play vibe, probably because both episodes take place in one location, and Stephen Moffat had just finished writing a play of his own at the time, and that episode was another 15th Doctor highlight. This is the first episode of the entire show to have an entirely non-white cast, outside of the flashback with Belinda, and there's clearly a big racial aspect to this episode, with lots of references to black culture, something I'm not qualified to talk about personally, but it really adds a lot to this episode and truly feels like a story that could only work with the 15th Doctor. This episode was meant to serve as a follow-up of sorts to Dot and Bubble, an episode that ended with the Doctor facing racism for the first time on screen. It's clear that that was a new experience for him at that point, and he wasn't sure how to react, but the story and the engine shows how he's progressed since then. There were some brief references to his race in Lux, but we get proper confirmation here that the Doctor has fully come to terms with this aspect of his identity now. It's also implied that he's had similar experiences in between these episodes, which, once again, I'm sure Big Finish will have a field day with. But like I said earlier, it's nice that the show isn't shying away from this part of the Doctor's current identity. And it's also nice that the show isn't just focusing on the negative aspects, as we see he's developed a sense of community in something as ordinary as a Nigerian barbershop. This isn't even Elam's first time writing a story like this. He wrote a play called Barbershop Chronicles. Ellams has said that barbershops are often considered safe spaces by British black men, a place where they're safe from discrimination and can talk freely, and that's what his play and this episode of Doctor Who are about. Barbers collect stories from all the people that come in and talk to them, because, imagine just sitting there awkwardly saying nothing instead. Couldn't be me. And the episode serves as a meta-commentary on stories themselves, putting a sinister twist on the concept of telling a story to your barber, as these people are stuck in the barbershop and are running out of stories to tell. The barbershop has been hijacked by the Barber, who I fully expected to be another Time Lord. This is such a great villain. His motivations are nuanced and he has such a great presence, such a casual sense of control and gravitas. And he rivals the bravado of the Doctor in a way I could easily imagine another Time Lord doing. His motivations tie into themes of colonialism and storytelling as a whole. He gave the gods their power with his stories, and they ended up claiming his stories as their own, writing him out and forgetting about him. And as they say, history is written by the victors. The Barber wants to assert himself as a god, killing the actual ones after they disregarded him once he built the Nexus, and it's an interesting motivation for him. I was honestly expecting him to be revealed as the god of stories or something, but I like that the episode subverts the whole god aspect of this era, giving us a false god. And the Doctor and Belinda laughing when the Barber tries to be all ethereal and intimidating is a great subversion of expectations. I mean, tying things back to the Pantheon stuff, you could technically see him as a harbinger of these gods, I guess? But, I don't know, there's no real connection between the Pantheon and these other gods as far as I can tell. Things are left kind of vague, so you can fill in the blanks if you want. The stories are visualized in this window, and I love the art style. This is a really creative and immersive way of truly bringing these stories to life. The Doctor's story also does a good job of giving Belinda more backstory, expanding on her character in a meaningful and relevant way, and giving her some more depth despite her not having much of a presence in this episode. Which, while I'm talking about it, is a shame, as she was barely in the previous episode too, and this lack of presence is kind of the start of the downfall of Belinda as a character after she had a pretty interesting start, but I'll come back to this later. Yeah, to be honest, this episode's weak point is the side characters. Outside of their motivations for wanting to leave the barbershop, they aren't particularly fleshed out, and don't have a lot to do, which is a shame. Oh yeah, also, the Fugitive Doctor makes an appearance, which was a nice surprise. I mean, she's not really there, it's just a visual aid for the audience, as it turns out the Doctor was planned to marry Abby in that regeneration. The episode also points out that the Fugitive Doctor's story was never properly finished, but might be someday. Hopefully. It's revealed halfway through that the barbershop is travelling on a giant spider through the Nexus, basically a web of stories. This is another fantastic metaphor for storytelling, this worldwide web of interconnected stories going back countless years. Every story connects, so many stories expand on or are influenced by others, and they keep the world together. Stories are the oldest art form out there. Everything is a story of some kind. Even cave paintings from 250,000 years ago, they tell a story. Stories create beliefs, they bring people together, and they keep people and things alive, even after they're gone. As we saw in Lux, the Doctor's own story gave people life and brought them together, and the story in the engine ends with the Doctor summing up his endless, timeless life in just 6 words.
I'm born. I die. I'm bored!
It's a reference to Ernest Hemingway's iconic 6-word poem, For Sale, Baby Shoes Never Worn. And the Doctor's own poem is so simple, but highlights what they're all about. Despite all the hardships and struggles the Doctor faces, they keep going, always starting anew and prioritizing hope and the beauty of life. I genuinely hope this moment is remembered as one of the Doctor's most defining and iconic moments in years to come. Again, it shows the power of stories, how there's so much you can infer from just a few words, because of how much we've learned and experienced from the Doctor's story. It's like an epitaph. How do you sum up something as complex and impactful as an entire life of stories into just a few words? Greg Davis actually tackled this pretty well. One of his stand-up shows ends with him questioning how to summarize the life of those you love, resulting in him creating a fitting eulogy for his dad, and this episode kind of reminded me of that. That's why we need stories. They're the beating heart that keeps people alive long after they're gone. The Rings of Akaten was similar to this, an episode all about the power of stories, and that's another beautiful episode that I will defend with my life. And I really enjoyed how the story and the engine tackled this concept in a different, but still uniquely impactful way. As the Doctor once said, we're all stories in the end. Okay, wow, take a shot every time I say story in that segment, fucking hell. The story and the engine, don't stop taking shots, we're not done yet, is another unique and brilliant episode that serves as yet another highlight of the 15th Doctor era. This episode stands out in a way few episodes do, taking its limited space and dialogue-heavy narrative and crafting something beautifully deep and meaningful that leaves you thinking and theorizing long after the episode is over. There's a level of spirituality mixed with philosophy that fits with this era's themes of the supernatural, while taking things in a different direction, highlighting the importance of stories and containing great themes of black culture that fits the 15th Doctor era perfectly. So yeah, we're 5 for 5 in this series so far. Every episode has been at least a 7 out of 10. Genuinely one of the best runs of episodes the show has ever had. But now we get to the Interstellar Song Contest. And this is where things get a little shaky. I actually watched this episode with my mum, who, for context, has barely watched the show since Matt Smith left. And having spent the last few weeks raving about how good this series has been, only to be confronted with this, it was genuinely kind of embarrassing. Okay, honestly, for the most part, this episode is good. Taking it at face value, you've got a fun, camp episode that fits the idea of Doctor Who meets Eurovision in space pretty well. This episode looks absolutely stunning. It was the most expensive episode of the show's entire history, and you can tell. There are some fantastic visuals. The first act in particular is just so mesmerizing. The shot of all the people getting sucked out into space behind the Doctor, and the shot of them all just floating are so beautifully haunting. It's such a great opening to the episode. Belinda's panic attack is also a good moment. We get a sense of just how lost and far from home she is, as she panics about losing the Doctor, thinking about how amazing he truly was. She started out unwilling to travel with him, and still wants to get home, but she's come round to him somewhat over the series. But now her thoughts are clouded as she has a panic attack, suddenly talking about how amazing he is. All this is contrasted with Dugadoo playing in the background, which does actually add a lot, and is surprisingly accurate to how it feels to have a panic attack. I also really like Gary and Mike. They've got a fun dynamic, and they're goals, honestly.
Did I just fly through space on a confetti cannon? Yeah. Camp.
Now, look, make Doctor Who as camp as you want. I'm fully here for it. But don't acknowledge the campness. Now, there are a couple of things about this episode that make no sense, but I just gladly accept them because they're funny. Firstly, why is Ryland the only human who is kept alive after May the 24th? He's literally just kept in stasis and thawed out for events. It makes no sense, but oh well, I'm cool with it. Also, Dugadoo. Now, mentally, I'm still stuck on Mr. Ring-a-Ding, but I fully get the Dugadoo hype. I really Dugadoo. Frankly, Maury Gold has peaked as a composer here. I see no need for the Series 10 OST anymore. I love how everyone's performances in the song contest are live, but Dugadoo gets what looks like a pre-recorded, edited video. So my headcanon is that this is live, and Dugadoo holds the unimaginable power to manipulate reality that surpasses the gods themselves. Look, I am fully willing to suspend my disbelief if I think something is either cool or funny. Rylan and Dugadoo are funny, so I see no issue here. Graham Norton is also in this episode, finally making a planned appearance in the show after he accidentally interrupted the broadcasts of Rose and the Time of Angels in the past. I kinda wish there was a reference to those interruptions, like if the hologram suddenly appeared in the corner of the screen or something, but that's definitely way too obscure of a reference. Would have been funny though. The episode ends with Graham talking about how the Earth was destroyed, and it works in a weird way. He's not the best actor out there, but I think the way he delivers these lines works, since he's meant to be an AI hologram reconstruction. The way this info is dropped so casually by a hologram after a whole season of build-up does actually add a bit of intrigue. And I'll go more into this bit later, believe me, but Ncuti plays this dark side of the Doctor very well. One of the 15th Doctor's main little quirks is his use of pet names like Darling or Babes. They're usually used in an endearing way, but hearing them in an ominous and threatening context does work surprisingly well. So yeah, those are the things I liked about the Interstellar Song Contest. I really want to like this episode as a whole, but I just can't talk about it in good faith without discussing the political messaging, because it's clearly a big part of the story and has been a very contentious part of the episode. So the political messaging in this episode is quite clearly an analogy for the Israel and Palestine conflict, something Eurovision, the competition the Interstellar Song Contest is based on, has faced scrutiny for, even before October 2023. Israel's participation in Eurovision has been a controversial topic for a while, even before COVID, but the backlash has only got bigger in recent years. There is just no way you can't see this episode and its messaging as a parallel for Israel and Palestine. In this episode, the Interstellar Song Contest is sponsored by the Corporation, who we find out committed genocide against a race called the Hellions, invading and desecrating their home planet for their honey, which the Corporation sell as poppy honey. On a completely coincidental and unrelated note, Israel is referred to in the Bible as the land of milk and honey. Now, for years, Eurovision has been sponsored by Moroccan oil, which, despite its name, is an Israeli product. These things are just too coincidental to not see the Corporation in the Interstellar Song Contest as a parallel for Israel. Now, there is a chance this episode was written before October 2023. Fair enough, if that was the case, how could they know? But pre-production on this episode definitely continued during and after that month, with filming occurring in spring 2024. And I just refuse to believe there was no one in front of or behind the camera who took issue with how this episode was panning out. Now, a Doctor Who episode airing directly before Eurovision that contains commentary on Eurovision being complicit in normalizing a genocide? Great idea. The problem is that the way the episode handles this analogy, and specifically how the Doctor behaves here, is so incredibly problematic and disgusting that it's a genuine stain, not just on Ncuti's tenure, but on the show as a whole. The Hellions in this episode are the stand-in for Palestinians, and Kid here is a genocide survivor who wants revenge on the Corporation, but takes his fight too far, committing a terrorist attack on the Harmony Arena, and he plans on using a delta wave to massacre the 3 trillion people watching the contest live. I think that is unambiguously too far, and not the right way to gain closure for the genocide of your people. The problem here is the way the episode frames this narrative. Yeah, the idea of person wanting justice who takes things too far is a recurring trope in modern media that I really don't like, mainly because their behaviour is often used as an excuse to disregard the actions of the Corporation they're fighting. Kablam in Series 11 is another example of this. The episode focuses on the behaviour of Charlie, who takes his idea of revenge too far, but as a result, the episode doesn't properly acknowledge the faults of Kablam, not going into the fact that the system as a whole thrives on unnecessary labour exploitation and will even kill an innocent life for no good reason. This episode has the same problem. So much focus is put on the actions of Kid that nothing is done about the genocidal Corporation. And this leads into another big problem with this narrative. The Doctor. So he sees that Kid wants to kill 3 trillion people and he's angry. Okay, makes sense, but he doesn't stop and ask why the Hellions are doing this. Kid literally says he's getting revenge against the Corporation and the Doctor never asks why, which I think is out of character. Then the Doctor confronts Kid and tortures him. The Doctor, a genocide victim, played by Ncuti Gatwa, a genocide victim, tortures another genocide victim. By the way, at this point, Kid's delta wave is destroyed, he is no longer a threat to anyone, but the Doctor still tortures him repeatedly, never stopping to ask why he wanted to do this, ignoring the pleas of his granddaughter, who just kind of shows up suddenly. But then Belinda walks in, and the Doctor realizes what he's doing. And Belinda, the reluctant companion, never afraid to call the Doctor out on his dodgy behavior, hugs him.
What the fuck?
Then, the Doctor hands Kid off to the very corporation that caused his people's genocide. The Doctor is so ignorant and evil here, but the main problem is that this behaviour is never properly addressed or called out. Yeah, he has a brief moment of realisation, only for his next line of dialogue to show that he still thinks he's in the right for torturing Kid. You want a Dark Doctor in your episode? Great, I'm all for it. But you better make it incredibly clear that he's in the wrong, and make sure you don't purposely ignore your own political messaging purely so you can have the Doctor do something controversial. Thing is, there is absolutely a world where this works. This moment could be an exploration into how the Doctor behaves when he thinks nobody is watching. As far as he's concerned, Belinda is out there in space. Not dead, but he's alone, and doesn't have to put on a front to impress and comfort his companion. These darker explorations of the Doctor have been done before, and a lot of them happen in fantastic episodes. Dalek, The Waters of Mars, and Hellbent are great examples of the Doctor going too far, and the episode often improves because of it. But the point in all of those is that he is explicitly portrayed as being in the wrong, and his behaviour is called out, which simply doesn't happen in the Interstellar Song Contest. Have the Doctor learn the full context of the episode, realise his mistake, and do everything he can to make things right. And don't have Belinda take zero fucking issue with this behaviour. The fact that this comes one episode after the Doctor offered his hand to someone who was planning to kill 7 billion people as well just makes it even worse. Now, I've mentioned Kid's use of a delta wave a couple of times here, and that term might sound familiar to you. It was the same device the Doctor planned on using in the Series 1 finale. That story ended with the Doctor, a genocide survivor, having the choice to kill all of the Daleks with the delta wave, at the cost of wiping out all life on Earth. He doesn't, due to his character arc across the series, and that same plot point is used here. And it's handled abhorrently. Anyway, the episode ends with one of the Hellions singing at the song contest. Wow, what a satisfying ending. I'm sure this will definitely end the years of discrimination and genocide the Hellions have faced due to the corporation who haven't been stopped in any way. Nope, as long as we all hold hands and sing songs, everything is fine. I couldn't tell you who's to blame for the way this episode panned out. Was it Russell T Davies? Was it Juno Dawson? Was it the BBC? Was it Disney? I don't know. Were Russell and Juno forced by the BBC to not be too pro-Palestine with this script? The BBC have faced criticism in recent times for their lack of proper reporting on the genocide currently happening in Palestine. And I know the team who reports the news and the production team behind Doctor Who are two separate groups, but it really doesn't set a good precedent for you as a broadcaster when even your flagship family show insists on dancing around the subject it clearly wants to tell. Russell T Davies and writer Juno Dawson have both been openly pro-Palestine on social media, so I just couldn't tell you what happened here. Maybe some behind-the-scenes info on this episode will come out in years' time. But as it stands, in terms of morality and messaging, this episode is one of the worst in the show's entire history. Like I said, put all the political stuff aside, and you've got a fun, camp episode that I want to enjoy. But I simply just can't ignore this egregious messaging without being incredibly disingenuous. And the episode contains a post-credits scene, where a massive reveal happens. This is a very MCU thing, and I'm just not a fan of stuff like this. So, Mrs. Flood's identity is finally revealed. She's the Rani, another renegade time lady who appeared twice towards the end of Classic Who. Now, this made my jaw drop in the moment, but upon thinking about it, what about Mrs. Flood's character hints at her being the Rani? Why didn't she recognise the TARDIS until it dematerialised? Why can she break the fourth wall and deliver monologues to the audience? It just feels like Russell overstuffed her character with loads of vague hints, some of which could possibly make sense depending on where he took the mystery. But the simple fact is, he did not know who Mrs. Flood was going to be when she first appeared in the church on Ruby Road. He made it up as he went along, and it's painfully obvious. I mean, the Rani says trans rights, I guess? As for the bi-generation itself, again, it feels so anticlimactic. Remember when it happened in The Giggle? You know, the directing, the dialogue, all this stuff makes it feel like the impactful moment it's meant to be. Regardless of what you think about the concept of bi-generation, at least the reveal was done justice in that special. Here, it's just kind of like, oh, they can do that. Sure. Remember when reveals in Doctor Who were impactful? Remember when the idea of another Time Lord was a massive deal? The Rani makes her big return after over 30 years, and it's confined to a brief post-credits scene that feels like it was mainly meant to be circulated as a TikTok video. The Ronnie can also bi-generate now, sure, and I do kinda like the dynamic between her and Mrs. Flood. But I don't know, this is a real glup shito moment if I've ever seen one. Like, hardly anyone outside of hardcore fans is gonna know or care who the Ronnie is, and this introduction doesn't give casual viewers a reason to care. The intrigue is entirely superficial. When the Master came back, it was big. Even if you'd never watched Classic Who and had no idea who he was, the episode made it clear what he was all about, and really sold the weight of his return. This scene just doesn't do that. It's a short-term shock, but the lack of build-up or establishment of who the Ronnie is makes this a painfully anticlimactic reveal. But oh well, on to the finale. Okay, I do actually kinda like Wishworld. It's painfully obvious RTD had just finished WandaVision when he wrote this, but I still think this episode has an interesting premise. So to summarise, I will be coming back to this episode when Reform win the next election, just to see how accurate it is. So yeah, Conrad from Lucky Day has created a conservative wet dream, where homosexuality is unnatural, disabled people are dispossessed, and women exist purely to be housewives and mothers, while the husband goes off to work in his cushy 9 to 5. I really like the aesthetic of this episode, like it really sells this reality. It just feels like a romanticized idea of what the 50s were like, even down to the big dinosaur skeletons. In this world, even an insinuation of homosexuality is cause for alarm, as we see in this moment when the tone shifts so dramatically, and it's really tense. Even if Kate and Ibrahim is the absolute worst ship of all time, Shirley is also left begging on the street for handouts, like Conrad claims she does in Lucky Day. Disabled people are very much an out-of-sight, out-of-mind topic for people like him. There's some good commentary here on how this fundamentalist way some people believe society should be is inherently contradictory to the diverse human experience, as everyone is constantly filled with doubts, represented by slips that are quickly brushed aside. That is genuinely a good metaphor. The Doctor, or John Smith, sorry, and Belinda are anomalies themselves who highlight the contradictory nature of the world. Like, they're a mixed-race, non-white couple. That's probably the exact opposite of what Conrad wants in his world, and they are portrayed as outliers. And while I'm here, Belinda has this bit where she runs into the forest and screams because she can't remember Poppy being born. Yeah, it's a good performance, but like, why? Why did she do this? So, John Smith and Belinda's very existence here highlights the contradictory nature of Conrad's wish world. But it seems like Belinda's family also exists just fine? I find it hard to believe that Conrad, a conservative grifter who clearly hates all minorities, would draw the line at racism? Perhaps if the Doctor had a lower ranking job or was treated differently by others, then I'd be more inclined to accept this. But as it stands, it just kinda seems like Conrad forgot to add the racism mod into his world, which I just find hard to believe. This era hasn't shied away from the topic of racism specifically relating to the Doctor, so I don't see why it wouldn't tackle it now. There are so many great ideas here, with so much potential for rich, nuanced subtext, and a world full of narrative potential. Unfortunately, things feel less explored than they could be, as the episode has all the other finale stuff it needs to focus on, which is a shame. Honestly, I think the entire finale being focused around this conservative wish world would have worked a lot better. Scrap all the glup shitos and just have Conrad creating this world with his wish baby. This episode is yet another example of why the show needs longer episodes. 45 minutes just isn't enough to properly flesh out these worlds. I'm also not a big fan of this opener, mainly because you've got this husband just standing there behind the Ronnie the whole time, and he does nothing while his wife is turned to violets. It just feels like there's a lot of potential that goes to waste here, and I think a lot of it comes down to a lack of directing. The episode also has a lot of flashbacks. Look, I get wanting to remind the audience of the Vindicator or Conrad getting freed from prison. I'm fine with that. But why does the episode give us a flashback to Poppy from earlier in the episode? It just feels condescending, if anything. Oh yeah, Ruby is also here. She organizes a revolution with all the disabled people, and that revolution involves waiting underneath the Bone Palace until a building falls on them. Also, Rogue makes a cameo. I was really hoping to see Rogue again, but why does he just exist to give the Doctor a message about tables? My headcanon is that this is the Doctor's subconscious reaching out to him, but I don't know, it feels like a waste. Rogue deserves better, bring him back, man. is this really the last we're gonna see of him? This scene that looks like something you'd see on TV Burp?
Hail and Pace turn up on Doctor Who.
Doctor, can you? I haven't got much time. They're coming. And this hell dimension is sliding into the pit. I don't know if I'm gonna survive.
The Doctor in this episode believes he's a human, and you could draw parallels to human nature here, but I think the context is different enough that you can't really call Wishworld a cheap copy. I think Ncuti plays the more reserved, ordinary John Smith really well, contrasting with his youthful, energetic Doctor in a good way. I do also think this memory wipe makes the ending more interesting. The Rani revealing who she is as the Doctor subconsciously freaks out without knowing why is a unique way of reuniting these characters. Speaking of the Rani, Archie Panjabi was born for this role. She's just so charismatic and seems to really get the character. And on that note, thankfully, I like the way the Rani is portrayed here. I was a bit worried she was just going to be a carbon copy of the Master, but no, she definitely feels different. She's still a lot more cold and calculated and isn't just insane like the Master. And I could see a lot of her lines in this episode being said by Kate O'Mara. She's another great part of the episode that desperately needed more time, especially given her plan involves her becoming overshadowed in the second part. Yep, as if the Rani coming back wasn't enough, RTD decides to bring Omega back too. The first Time Lord, whose name hasn't even been mentioned in the show for nearly 40 years. Again, glup shitto. This is just so out of nowhere and just... why? I've used the term glup shitto a few times in this video, and if you don't know what that means, it's a reference to a Tumblr post from 2020 that takes the piss out of the recurring Star Wars trope of them hyping up the return of an obscure character whose name only means anything to hardcore fans. That's exactly what Doctor Who is doing here, with Sutekh, with the Rani, and now with Omega. It just drops these names without taking the time to establish their meaning, just assuming the audience will know who they are. And that's weird enough on its own, but to do it so much with an era that was repeatedly marketed as a fresh jumping on point for new viewers? Like, who is Doctor Who being made for nowadays? I don't think even RTD knows. So, it's been a while since the Rani showed up in the show. A lot has happened in that time, such as the biggest war in the universe between the Time Lords and the Daleks that resulted in both races vanishing from existence. Now, I have many questions. Did the Rani fight in the Time War? If so, was she there when the Doctors saved Gallifrey? The Doctor and the Rani reference a genetic explosion, but are they referring to the Master destroying Gallifrey in Spyfall? Or the death particle from the Timeless Children? And that side effect was never mentioned in either of those episodes. Okay, before we get to this, no the fuck it wasn't. Ruby literally saw firsthand what happened to anyone who didn't fit Conrad's idealized view of society. Why is this episode so set on dismissing the struggles of disabled people? I know Ruby was probably just bullshitting to buy some time, but this moment still has strange connotations, especially given the rest of this episode's morals. Then, Ruby wishes for Conrad to be happy. It ties back into the conservative grifter mindset, how these people are just fundamentally unhappy with their own lives. I do like that resolution for this character, but like I said earlier, this would have been so much better if Conrad was the main villain here. Or at the very least, if he had more of a presence in this finale. I don't know whose fault this is, whether it's RTD's or Disney's or someone else, but this is a real situation involving real people, so I'm gonna avoid speculating on the topic, and I advise you do the same. But taking this episode at face value, it has some good moments, but is unfortunately bogged down by an unnecessary over-reliance on the past. With a rushed ending and some very questionable endings and motivations for the main characters, the Ncuti Gatwa deserved better.
And the marvellous thing is the past 61 years don't matter. It's here, it's now, it's new, it's fresh, it's for you.
It was always the plan to do this amount of seasons.
It's very much kind of internet age storytelling where you just hope it'll generate content.
Everyone who works on Doctor Who does it for a while, not forever. You must process out the door and another lot come in. That's really quite important.
Sack Russell T Davies.
I really thought long and hard about how to do this next section. I don't like being negative about this show, and I want it to succeed and grow and last another 60 years. But in its current state, that's just not going to happen. Doctor Who, in its current form, is stuck in a time loop. The current production team, under Russell T Davies, is seemingly incapable of moving on from the past, and are taking the show in an unsustainable, self-contradictory direction, filled with questionable narrative choices and a severe lack of the emotional storytelling and character depth that defined the show for so many years. When Russell T Davies was announced to be returning as Doctor Who showrunner in 2021, it was huge. There was a level of hope in the fandom we hadn't seen for a while. Then Ncuti Gatwa is announced as the next Doctor. Awesome, he's a great actor with a real sense of vibrance and eccentricity, a fantastic fit for the show. Overall, things are shaping up for this to be the start of a new golden age. For the 60th anniversary, David Tennant and Catherine Tate return for a few specials. Okay, cool, that's a good way of drumming up interest while giving Ncuti time to film his other projects. I wouldn't have much of a problem with this on its own, but the fact that it comes a year and a half after the return of David Tennant just reeks of desperation. I can accept David Tennant coming back for an anniversary year. Fair enough. But to then have this immediately after? The show in its current form cannot move on from its heyday, and it's so depressing watching Doctor Who cannibalize itself for the sake of briefly going viral. There was a time where it seemed like there were no plans to continue the show after The Power of the Doctor. The show had an uncertain future, but the return of Russell T Davies seemed to spark some hope for the future. But here we are, 18 months into this new era, in the exact same position we started in. Ncuti was so wasted and unvalued as the Doctor. Like I said, he brought a perfect sense of eccentricity to the role, while bringing his own unique charisma and personality in a way that could make the Doctor stand out like never before. But from the very beginning, he faced an uphill battle, as his first appearance involved him living in the shadow of David Tennant, not even getting his own proper introduction. Ncuti has a very energetic presence, and I could easily see him commanding the scene in the same way the Doctor always has. But throughout his whole tenure, he plays such a passive role, almost never taking charge, and the majority of his episodes are resolved without any real input from him. Now, I think it is worth mentioning that the Ninth Doctor had a similar experience. The End of the World is actually the only episode in his entire series where he plays a direct part in the episode's resolution. Despite this, he feels a lot more fleshed out and involved with his stories than 15. Why is that? Well, I think it comes down to the Ninth Doctor having a clear and conclusive character arc. So yes, the Ninth Doctor barely having an input on the resolutions of all but one of his adventures feels cheap when you properly think about it, but the show compensates with a clear, overarching narrative throughout the series, and solid, justifiable reasons for why the Doctor's role is more passive. In the first episode, Rose saves the Doctor from the Autons. The purpose of that moment is to subvert the damsel in distress trope that plagued classic Who. Mickey is the one who defeats the Slitheen in World War III, and that's the start of his character arc, as he grows in confidence over the next two series. The ending of Dalek is all about the Doctor overcoming his rage and guilt of the Time War, and Father's Day and Boomtown both set up the solution for the finale. Even though the Doctor has more of a passive role throughout Series 1, he feels really fleshed out by the end, and that's because his character arc is still given the attention it deserves. He slowly learns to overcome the guilt of the Time War, dealing with his feelings of regret and self-loathing, getting back in touch with his compassion and morality thanks to Rose, and eventually accepting that he really was fantastic after all. The 15th Doctor lacks this kind of direction. He barely changes across his 2 seasons, and any signs of a character arc are quickly brushed aside after a brief acknowledgement that they should exist. The closest thing he has to character development is his acceptance of the racism he now experiences, being caught off guard at first in Dot and Bubble, before accepting and acknowledging it in Lux, and embracing his ethnicity and culture in the story and the engine. There is something there, but it's unfortunately not enough. And the story in the engine does a lot of heavy lifting for the rest of the season in terms of how 15's character develops. Then there's the scene of him torturing a genocide victim in the Interstellar Song Contest. I think this is unambiguously too far for the Doctor, and his refusal to even question why the Hellions are doing what they're doing is out of character. So if you're gonna do something as sudden and weird as this, you better follow up on it immediately afterward. But nope. The Doctor doesn't learn his lesson, he stands his ground and doubles down on his unquestioning hatred for Kid, and doesn't learn anything by the end. The Doctor's behaviour in that episode is so genuinely gross that it unfortunately brings down the character of 15 as a whole. A common criticism of the 13th Doctor era are the multiple instances where she says or does something insensitive or downright cruel, which is never properly acknowledged or called out by the show. This behaviour from the Doctor in the Interstellar Song Contest is worse than most, if not all, of those instances. And while I'm on the topic of dodgy morals, this era is full of them. RTD2 claims to take a progressive stance, including in discussing the struggles of minorities, calling out harmful right-wing behaviour, and taking an overtly political stance. Now, to be clear, I am all for diversity and social and political commentary in media. That is not a new concept for Doctor Who. The show has always been diverse and overtly political. To deny that is to basically admit you weren't paying attention. The problem with this current iteration of the show is that the progressive aspects feel so superficial. It doesn't come off as the writers genuinely having things to say, it comes off as virtue signalling. For example, look at characters like Rose Noble and Shirley Ann Bingham. Their only purpose is to either face transphobia or ableism, before being cast aside and forgotten about for the rest of the episode. This is also indicative of the problems with characterization in this era, but I'll come back to that in a bit. I do think Russell T Davies's heart is in the right place, but there have been so many contradictory choices by him that I really struggle to tell what kind of message he's trying to push. He changed the design of the sonic screwdriver because he didn't want it looking like a gun, only for the Doctor to use a gun anyway. Not only that, but literal children working for UNIT are given guns. A wheelchair ramp is installed in the TARDIS, which is acknowledged and then never actually used. And Belinda is established as an independent woman who refuses to be put in a box or controlled by men, so she can become a single mother. And this, once again, ties in with the characterization of this era. Characters just don't feel fleshed out. The UNIT family is just a constant rotating door of different faces who do nothing of importance. I've already talked about Rose and Shirley, but Mel is another victim of this lack of characterization. She's been brought back after nearly 40 years, and for what? To say, we meet again to the Ronnie? Remember when Sarah Jane came back and it felt earned and impactful because the episode took the time to discuss the effects of life after the Doctor, while tying into the Doctor and Rose's relationship, foreshadowing her departure in the finale? Yeah, Mel doesn't get anything like that. She's literally just there to be there. And she's not the only one. There have been so many times in this era where old, obscure characters are brought back that won't be satisfying to anyone other than hardcore fans. When the Daleks, or the Cybermen, or the Master came back, it was big. Even if you had no idea who they were, the show did them justice and revitalized them for a whole new audience. That simply hasn't happened in this era. Obscure classic Who characters are just brought back, and the impact of their return relies on their name alone, which the majority of viewers won't even know. This ties back into my point that Ncuti was meant to breathe new life into this show, only for his tenure to be constantly bogged down by an over-reliance on the past, the most egregious example being him sandwiched between David Tennant and Billie Piper. Yeah, let's talk about the elephant in the room. Billie Piper as the next Doctor. Now, this was a surprise, and it was a fun experience seeing this in the cinema. Everyone screamed, myself included. But the more I thought about it, the more depressing it became. Again, I would be fine with this on its own, but it comes way too soon after the return of David Tennant for me to view this in good faith. This just reeks of a desperate, last-minute change that purely exists to go viral. Russell T Davies isn't worried about sustaining the show long-term, he's focused on the short-term effects of online publicity. So much so that he's willing to abandon the art of solid, pre-planned storytelling for the sake of pulling sudden twists that purely exist to go viral on TikTok or whatever. Russell, you're a fantastic writer. Fucking act like it. Stop with the whole generate content shit and tell good stories. Because I know you still can. Lux is proof that you can still knock it out of the park in new and creative ways when you want to. This era shines the brightest when it goes out there and does fresh and experimental things, so I don't get this insistence on regressing and relying on the show's past. Russell, if you can't acknowledge the problems your behaviour is causing, then respectfully, with all the good in the world, please leave. Thank you for all you've done for Doctor Who over the years, but please let someone else take over and give the show the breath of fresh air it so desperately needs. I'm not saying this out of malice or hatred or spite. I'm saying this because I know you are capable of so much better. Okay, that was a lot. I know it seems like I hate the current era. I really don't. With the current state of the show at this point, it's easy to forget that Season 2 did have a lot to like, and really felt like a return to form for the most part. I think Lux to the story and the engine was one of the best runs of episodes of the entire show. Some of Season 1's problems do carry over here, but something I think Season 2 really improves on is subtext, with there being a lot more nuanced commentary and things to analyse this time around. That, and I think Season 2 does have higher highs. Lux and the story and the engine in particular are perfect examples of the show doing something really fresh and showcasing this era's true potential. With that being said, I don't know why the show is so insistent on relying on its past in the superficial way it does now. It's completely antithetical to the jumping on point 15's tenure was marketed as, and heavily detracts from the new, rich stories we constantly see hints of. Like I said earlier, Conrad's conservative wet dream could absolutely make for a compelling finale on its own. There's really no need to shoehorn in obscure classic Who villains that I think the 15th Doctor shows signs of character development in this season, but unfortunately, there's just not really enough. Belinda also starts off strong, having a unique, reluctant relationship with the Doctor. She had the potential to be a great companion. Unfortunately, after the well, she becomes either unimportant or behaves way too differently. And then the reality ward does her so fucking dirty. Her whole story and character is just full of wasted potential, and it's a real shame. The finale was clearly very rushed and full of last-minute changes, and so things feel really unresolved. Regeneration feels so out of nowhere. I had such high hopes for this new era of the show. I really thought we were about to enter a new golden age. But here we are now, not even 2 years later, in the same dire position we were in originally. This era suffers from lack of characterization and being too fast-paced, but the thing is, the 60th anniversary specials had slow moments. There were points where the story could breathe, particularly in Wild Blue Yonder, which is still an absolute highlight of the entire show. I don't know why the show insists on brushing aside the character side of things, when the characters were what made the show so compelling back in the day. Like, could you imagine this scene from the fires of Pompeii happening nowadays? I don't want to sound like those people who go on about how Doctor Who died with Peter Capaldi, but the unfortunate truth is that there was a certain magic to the show that's been sorely lacking after Series 10. These newer seasons are still enjoyable, and there are glimmers of that old magic, but it just feels like the show doesn't know where to go now. My problem isn't with the politics or the wokeness. If anything, my problem is that the show isn't woke enough. A lot of the show's attempts to be progressive nowadays feel more like virtue signaling than anything. Characters like Rose and Shirley who have the potential to be great, but exist purely for the show to brag that it has minorities in it. It's poor representation and actually feeds into all the anti-woke narratives. At this point, it's really hard to be optimistic about where the show is headed. I mean, the war between the land and the sea looks like it could have that edgy crime drama vibe that Torchwood had, so I really hope that ends up being good. But I just have no reason to care about where the story goes next, when it's clear Russell is making it up as he goes along. If Billie Piper does end up doing some specials or whatever as the Doctor, I'm sure she'll be great. But I have no reason to care about the mystery of why the Doctor has Rose's face, when this era has proved time and time again that it cannot give a satisfying narrative explanation to save its life, and repeatedly gives hand-wavy explanations for significant plot points. I hope the show gets back on track. I really hope they take the criticisms of the last 2 seasons on board. And most importantly, I hope the show moves forward. The production team has really got their work cut out for them at this point, but whatever happens, the show needs to move on from its past. I think the reboot we were promised a couple of years ago needs to happen at this point. But yeah, I've ranted about this children's show for long enough. Sack Russell T Davies. See you in another 6 months.